Ethan Walker had it all. At 39 years old, he commanded a tech empire valued in the billions, lived in a glass-walled estate clinging to the California coast, and carried an obsession that had drained $35 million from his fortune over the past decade. His fixation wasn't on business, but on a mystery: the elusive young woman who had once saved his life in Morocco, only to vanish without a trace. Meanwhile, his housekeeper, Anna Miller, arrived each morning through the back entrance of the sprawling home. She dusted the imported furniture in silence, wiped fingerprints from the glass banisters, and disappeared at dusk, as though she were little more than a shadow. That was exactly her intention, because Anna carried a secret that could ruin them both. She was the woman Ethan had been hunting for, hiding in plain sight as just another invisible employee in his pristine world. For 6 months, she had managed this perilous disguise. But on this particular morning, while polishing the silver frame of a half-finished portrait of her younger self hidden behind his study bookshelf, Anna realized the man who never noticed his staff had finally begun to notice her, and once he did, both their lives would change forever. The California sun poured through the estate's floor-to-ceiling windows, streaking the polished marble floors with bands of gold that Anna had buffed to perfection an hour earlier. At precisely 7:15 a.m., Ethan emerged from his private wing, striding across the foyer with the steady rhythm of someone used to control. His Italian leather shoes clicked against the stone like the tick of a metronome. His eyes never left the glow of his phone, scrolling through market updates from Tokyo and London. In his other hand, he carried a brushed steel travel mug filled with single-origin Ethiopian coffee that cost more per pound than Anna's entire grocery budget for the month. Anna stood halfway up the sweeping staircase, dustcloth in hand, pressing herself against the banister to appear as small and invisible as possible. In the months since she had joined the Walker household, she had learned the cardinal rule of survival: don't be seen. Ethan swept past her without so much as a glance. To him, she was no more significant than the paintings she polished or the Persian rugs she vacuumed. The cloth circled smoothly over the railing beneath her hand. Her movements were quiet, efficient, and unremarkable. Anna had perfected invisibility, pressed uniforms, hair twisted into a neat bun, her presence marked only by the faint lavender polish that lingered in rooms after she left. She had trained herself to breathe shallowly, step lightly, and embody everything expected of staff: efficient, reliable, and forgettable. But Anna noticed everything. She saw how Ethan had begun pacing during his calls lately, creating worn tracks in the rugs of his office. She observed the tense line of his jaw whenever certain names were mentioned, the impatient drumming of his fingers against desks and windowsills when he thought no one was looking. Most of all, she recognized the way he would sometimes pause mid-conversation and gaze out at the ocean beyond the glass walls, as if searching for something across the horizon that was lost to him forever. In the kitchen, the low hum of staff activity stirred as Anna came in to collect cleaning supplies. Martha, the head housekeeper who had worked for the family nearly 2 decades, stood chatting with David, the chauffeur. Their voices dropped the moment Anna stepped in, but she caught a fragment of conversation. Something about a mystery woman and private investigators. "Morning, Anna," Martha greeted, her tone brisk but not unkind. Martha was professional, always keeping the staff at a polite distance, even those who had been around for years. "Good morning," Anna murmured, bending to reach for the silver polish under the sink. David leaned casually against the counter, unable to keep quiet. "I'm telling you, Martha, I drove him to meet that investigator again last week. Same one he's been hiring for years. Must have burned through millions by now." "That's none of our business," Martha scolded quickly, though her eyes flickered with curiosity. 10 years, David pressed, lowering his voice. "He's been searching for someone for 10 years. With all the money he's thrown at it, you'd think he'd have found them. Or just let it go by now." Anna kept her expression neutral as she arranged bottles and brushes into her basket. She didn't need to wonder who Ethan was chasing. She already knew. That evening, the Walker estate was transformed for the annual anniversary dinner of Ethan's company. Crystal chandeliers blazed overhead, casting diamond light across a table heavy with a 7-course meal prepared by a Michelin-starred chef flown in for the night. Anna moved through the sea of investors and board members like a wraith, refilling glasses, sweeping away empty plates, her steps practiced and unremarkable. Ethan commanded the head of the table, raising his glass in a toast. His smile was flawless, his words polished to perfection. But Anna noticed the way his eyes shifted toward the door each time it opened. She saw the fleeting spark of hope when a new guest arrived, and the disappointment that followed when it wasn't who he longed for. Even in the midst of a celebration of his triumph, surrounded by admirers and allies, Ethan Walker seemed profoundly alone. "A phenomenal quarter," declared Richard Harris, a veteran investor whose gravelly voice carried over the clinking of crystal. "The Singapore expansion alone will bring in 40 million. "Thank you, Richard," Ethan replied smoothly, though his attention had already strayed. A server entered quietly through the service door, and for a single heartbeat, Ethan's breath hitched, as though he believed the one he sought had finally appeared. But it was only another caterer, another stranger, another disappointment. Anna kept moving, a shadow in his perfect house, her heart pounding with the secret she carried. The Pacific Ocean stretched endlessly beyond the cliffs, its restless waves hammering the rocks far below like the pulse of something eternal. Morning sunlight bounced off the glass walls of Ethan Walker's estate, a mansion so vast and sleek it looked less like a home and more like an idea brought to life. Steel beams, clean lines, endless panes of glass, and not a single detail out of place. At 39, Ethan Walker was already a legend in Silicon Valley circles, a man whose software empire had rewritten the very language of commerce. Billionaire, innovator, visionary. The newspapers had given him every title imaginable, though none of them hinted at the hollow inside him. Every morning he kept to his ritual, down the grand staircase at precisely 7:15, Italian shoes clicking against polished stone in steady rhythm, titanium mug in hand, filled with single-origin Ethiopian coffee that cost more per pound than most people made in an hour. The man thrived on precision. Markets across Tokyo, Frankfurt, and New York obeyed his commands. Yet for all his control, one piece of his life remained unruly, gnawing, unresolved. 10 years earlier in Morocco, he'd been pulled back from death's edge by a stranger, a woman. Her face haunted him. She had vanished into the night without leaving even a name behind. Since then, Ethan had spent $35 million chasing shadows. Hires upon hires, detectives, intelligence experts, private security consultants, all turned up nothing. Friends told him to let it go, board members begged him to move on, but obsession is rarely polite. And so, the search never stopped. Anna Miller knew all of this. She knew it because she was the one he sought. The one who had dragged him bleeding through a rooftop under fire, guiding him toward an alley ladder, then disappearing before he could ask her why. She had carried that secret through 10 years of running, new names, new jobs, new places to hide. Now she was 30, living behind another false identity, quietly scrubbing the floors of the very man who would give anything to find her. Anna had mastered invisibility. Pressed uniform, hair drawn back in a neat bun, soft shoes that barely whispered across marble. She had learned to make her presence no more noticeable than the scent of lemon polish that lingered after she left. For 6 months, she had moved like a shadow in the Walker estate, dusting imported sculptures, polishing chandeliers that cost more than her childhood home, collecting dishes after dinners she could never afford to attend. But this night was different. The mansion had been transformed for Walker Technologies' anniversary gala. Chandeliers blazed, wine flowed, and the house filled with investors whose laughter sounded like polished coins tumbling across marble. 7 courses of delicacies lined the long table, each crafted by a Michelin-starred chef flown in from Manhattan. The smell of truffle oil and buttered lobster floated through the air. The music of a string quartet slipped beneath the hum of voices. It was a night of power, profit, and spectacle. Anna moved silently among the guests, balancing a silver tray with the kind of grace that came from practice. She refilled champagne flutes without interrupting conversations, collected empty plates before anyone asked, always careful not to linger. Years of hiding had taught her that the safest place was in the blind spots of those who considered themselves important. And men like Ethan Walker rarely looked twice at the help, or so she believed. Near midnight, as Ethan raised his glass at the head of the table, Anna approached the sideboard to collect empty glasses. The toast rang out across the room. To progress, to resilience, to another decade of innovation. The crowd cheered. The sound echoed against marble walls. But Ethan's eyes drifted from the applause toward the service door, scanning each new arrival with the same restless hope he'd carried for a decade. Investors clapped him on the back, praised his brilliance, but Anna saw the weariness in his smile. She bent to gather a discarded napkin just as she brushed past him. And then it happened. His gaze fell on her. Not through her, on her. The moment lasted no more than a heartbeat, but for Anna it stretched into eternity. She braced for the usual indifference, the practiced blindness of a man who never acknowledged the ones who polished his marble and emptied his trash. Instead, Ethan hesitated. His eyes lingered on her face, narrowing slightly, as though struggling to place a memory that refused to surface. "Thank you," he said quietly. 2 simple words. Words he had likely spoken 1,000 times at press conferences and investor dinners. But here, directed at her, they struck like thunder. Anna dropped her gaze instantly. "Of course, Mr. Walker," she murmured, her voice steady though her pulse raced. She retreated toward the kitchen, each step carrying her further from danger. Inside, safe behind the swinging service doors, her composure cracked. Her heart hammered as if she'd run a marathon. That look, his look, was dangerous. For 6 months, she had survived by being unseen, a piece of furniture in his perfect world. If Ethan Walker began to recognize her, even in fragments, her entire fragile disguise would crumble. Still, she forced herself to finish her shift, moving with robotic precision until the last guest departed and the chandeliers dimmed. By dawn, the mansion was once again quiet, the echo of music replaced by the distant crash of waves. The next morning, sunlight spilled across the estate, cutting gold paths across marble she had polished only hours before. Anna moved through the study, dustcloth in hand, determined to shake the memory of his gaze. She had survived worse. Gunfire in Tangier, betrayal in Lisbon, sleepless nights in safe houses with nothing but aliases for comfort. One strange look from Ethan Walker could not unravel her discipline. Yet her hands trembled as she reached the bookshelf, her cloth tracing a familiar routine along leather-bound volumes and silver picture frames. That was when she saw it, a canvas, half hidden behind a stack of ledgers, draped carelessly with a white cloth. Something in her stilled. She knew better than to pry. Rules for survival were etched into her bones. Do not look where you don't belong. Do not touch what is not yours. Do not invite suspicion. But curiosity was a treacherous thing. With a hand she could not quite control, Anna lifted the cloth. Her breath caught. It was unfinished, but unmistakable. The portrait of a young woman. The artist had captured eyes both intelligent and guarded, lips curved in a smile that hid more than it revealed. The image pulsed with vitality, alive with secrets. Anna staggered back, the cloth slipping from her fingers. She knew that face. She had seen it every morning in the mirror, though younger, softer, before the world had taught her to hide. Ethan had painted her. Panic surged, hot and wild. She dropped the cloth back over the canvas, smoothed it with trembling hands, and resumed her dusting as though nothing had happened. But her thoughts spiraled. How much did he remember? How close was he to tearing open the life she had built? That night, she called her contact, speaking in whispers from the pantry where no one could overhear. "He's noticing. Not yet. I'll tell you when it's time. Just be ready." The storm outside rattled the windows, rain drumming like impatient fingers. Inside, Anna's heart echoed the rhythm. Ethan Walker, the man who had once been a stranger she saved, had finally begun to see her. And when he did, both their lives would never be the same. The mansion was still, the kind of stillness that comes only after storms. Outside, the Pacific rolled in heavy swells, the waves striking the cliffs in muffled thunder. The night before, lightning had painted the sky with fire, shaking the walls of Ethan Walker's glass fortress. Now, the morning light streamed through tall windows, the air washed clean, and smelling faintly of salt and stone. Anna Miller moved quietly through the study, her soft-soled shoes gliding across polished oak floors. She carried her basket of dusting supplies like a shield, every motion measured, controlled, invisible. She had survived 6 months under Ethan's roof by becoming part of the background, as forgettable as the lavender polish she used to clean the silver frames. But today, something was different. Perhaps it was the storm's aftermath, or perhaps it was the memory of Ethan's eyes the night of the gala, the way he had looked at her, not through her. That tiny pause, that flicker of recognition, had rattled her more than gunfire ever had. In Tangier, she had outrun bullets and betrayal. Here in California, she could not outrun a single glance. She moved along the bookshelf, dusting each leather-bound volume with steady hands. It was then she noticed the canvas, half hidden behind a row of ledgers, cloaked with a white sheet. It looked forgotten, abandoned in haste, the corner peeking out like a secret begging to be uncovered. Anna froze. Her instincts screamed against it. Rule number 1, never pry into an employer's private things. Rule number 2, curiosity kills cover stories. Rule number 3, the less you know, the longer you live. And yet, something pulled her forward. A thread in her chest tightened, urging her to lift the cloth. Her fingers hesitated on the fabric. Then, with the quiet care of a thief, she drew it back. The sight stole her breath. It was a painting, not finished, but alive with detail. The brush strokes were bold, deliberate, carrying the surety of an artist who had studied his subject with obsession. The face that emerged from the canvas was unmistakable. A young woman, her eyes intelligent, searching, her smile slight but filled with secrets. Anna's knees nearly buckled. She knew this face because it was her own. Not the woman she was now, hardened by years of running, hair pulled back in a maid's bun, shoulders bent by the weight of invisibility. No, this was the girl she had been a decade earlier, younger, softer, before Tangier, before blood on rooftops, and names burned like old passports. Ethan had painted her. The realization struck her like a blow. Her trembling hand replaced the cloth, smoothing it quickly, as if erasing her discovery could undo its truth. She stepped back, heart racing. He remembered. Not just remembered, he had captured her in color, preserved her as a vision on canvas. For 10 years, she had hidden under names that didn't belong to her, working jobs that left no trace, erasing herself at every turn. Yet here she was, immortalized by the very man who hunted her. Why? Why had he painted her? Did he know more than he let on? How close was he to unraveling the disguise she had wrapped so tightly around herself? She forced her hands to steady, resuming her dusting. But her thoughts stormed harder than the Pacific waves. That evening, after the other staff had retired, Anna lingered in the kitchen longer than usual, polishing cutlery until her reflection blurred in silver. She replayed every moment she had spent in Ethan's presence. His gaze drifting to doorways, the way his jaw tightened when investors spoke of Morocco, his solitary pauses at the window staring out to sea. The painting explained it all. He wasn't just haunted. He was keeping vigil. Her phone buzzed faintly in her apron pocket. She slipped into the pantry before answering. "It's me," she whispered. The voice on the other end was low, urgent. "You sound shaken. What happened?" Anna hesitated. "He's remembering. I saw a painting, my face. Younger, but it's me. He never let go." Silence. Then, "That makes him dangerous." "No," Anna said quickly. "Not dangerous like Victor, but dangerous to my cover. If he connects me to Morocco, everything unravels. You need to leave." "Not yet. If I run now, he'll chase harder. I can't risk him bringing Victor's people to my door." The voice exhaled sharply. "You're playing a long game on a broken board. I've been playing it for 10 years. I'll know when to fold." She ended the call, shoving the phone deep into her pocket as footsteps echoed down the hall. Eleanor Hartley, the new maid, appeared in the doorway. Her sharp eyes flicked to Anna. "Working late again?" Anna kept her expression neutral. "Storm made a mess. Didn't want to leave it for morning." Eleanor's lips curved in a smile that never reached her eyes. "Mr. Walker notices everything. I'm sure he appreciates it." Something in her tone chilled Anna. The next morning, Anna entered the study again, determined not to glance at the canvas. But the memory of it burned behind her eyelids. She worked swiftly, efficiently, focusing on her tasks. Yet she could feel it there, behind the bookshelf, hidden but not forgotten. The door creaked open. Ethan stepped inside. Anna froze, cloth in hand, pulse roaring in her ears. He rarely came into the study at this hour. He crossed the room with his usual precision, phone in one hand, documents in the other. Without looking up, he murmured, "Coffee, please. Black. 2 sugars." "Yes, Mr. Walker." Her voice betrayed nothing. She moved past him, careful to keep her steps measured, her expression blank. But as she reached the doorway, she felt his gaze on her back, steady, searching, unsettling. By the time she returned with the coffee, he was standing near the bookshelf, too close to the hidden canvas. Her heart nearly stopped. He accepted the cup without a word, eyes still on the shelf. She forced herself to retreat, though every instinct screamed to look back. If he pulled aside that cloth, if he asked her anything. But he didn't, not yet. That night, Anna dreamed of Morocco, the rooftop, the broken radio, the sound of gunfire cracking through the air. She saw Ethan's terrified face as she pulled him toward the ladder, the silver bracelet slipping into her hand as he whispered, "If we survive, I'll find you." She woke with tears on her cheeks and the taste of fear in her mouth. The next day, while gathering linens in the hallway, she overheard voices from the study, Ethan's deep tone, taut with frustration, and another man's, Marcus Whitmore, the investigator. "We've expanded the search. Brazil, Paris, Nairobi. Leads keep going cold." Ethan's reply was sharp. "I don't care. We keep looking. $35 million, Marcus. She's out there. She has to be." Anna pressed against the wall, her breath caught in her chest. The painting wasn't just art. It was fuel. Proof that his obsession hadn't dimmed, but deepened. She realized then, the danger was no longer Victor Hale alone. Ethan Walker himself, with all his wealth and resources, had become a storm she could not outrun. And yet, some small part of her trembled, not only with fear, but with something else, a dangerous longing. Because in that unfinished canvas, in those remembered eyes, she saw a truth she had buried for a decade. He had never stopped looking for her, and part of her had wanted to be found. The storm had been building for hours, creeping across the Pacific, like an old ghost returning for what it was owed. By the time dusk settled over the Walker estate, the sky had darkened to an ominous gray, and the wind began to howl through the towering glass walls of the mansion. Rain beat against the windows in sheets, like hammers on an anvil. In the distance, lightning cracked across the horizon, illuminating the dark waters below, turning the ocean into a roiling mass of silver fury. Inside, the mansion was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that envelops a house when its inhabitants are caught in their own private storms. Ethan Walker sat at his desk in the study, his eyes fixed on the blue glow of his computer screen. But his mind was elsewhere. Despite the raging storm outside, despite the business deals and the millions he had made, Ethan couldn't shake the sense of unease that had settled over him in the past few days. Something was changing, something he couldn't put his finger on, and it bothered him more than he cared to admit. He had always been a man of control, someone who knew the answers before the questions were asked. His success in tech had been built on precision, on mastering every detail, on being able to see patterns where others saw chaos. But the woman, the ghost from Morocco, had disrupted that balance. She had slipped through his grasp for 10 years, vanishing without a trace. Yet now, here she was, closer than ever, hiding in plain sight under his roof. Ethan could no longer ignore the gnawing feeling that Anna Miller, the maid who had quietly tended to his home for the past 6 months, was somehow the key to the mystery that had tormented him for so long. There was something about her that unsettled him. Something about the way she moved, the way she avoided his gaze, as if she knew too much, but dared not speak it. He had noticed it the moment he saw her at the gala, the way she was never really there, yet always somehow present. He couldn't stop thinking about the painting. He couldn't stop thinking about her face, captured in oils, as if time itself had somehow preserved her. The woman who had saved him had returned. Only now she wore a different face. A face that, for reasons he didn't fully understand, was both familiar and foreign. As the storm outside raged on, Anna worked quietly in the kitchen. She had always been adept at blending into the background, moving like a shadow, her presence nothing more than a fleeting impression. But tonight, there was a restlessness in her.
an unease that gnawed at the edges of her calm exterior. She moved from counter to counter, organizing the silverware, washing the dishes, her movements precise and calculated, as if the rhythm of the work would steady her thoughts. But it didn't. Every creak of the house seemed to echo too loudly. Every gust of wind that rattled the windows felt like a reminder that the life she had built in the shadows was beginning to crack. Ethan had seen her. Ethan had noticed her. And that one brief moment of recognition, of connection, threatened to unravel everything she had worked so hard to hide. She had thought she could survive here. She had convinced herself that the vastness of the mansion, the emptiness of the halls, the cold perfection of everything in Ethan's world would swallow her up, make her invisible. But now, she wasn't so sure.
She wasn't sure how much longer she could keep pretending, keep hiding behind the mask of the quiet, invisible maid. The wind howled louder, and the sound of the rain intensified, as if nature itself was reflecting her turmoil. The house seemed to close in around her, each shadow a reminder of the secrets she had buried, each sound a warning that things were no longer as they seemed. It was then that Ethan appeared in the kitchen doorway. Anna's heart skipped a beat. She didn't turn to face him immediately, instead focusing on the plate she was drying, her hands trembling slightly as she ran the cloth over the porcelain. "Anna," he said, his voice low but distinct, cutting through the stillness of the room. She froze. He never called her by name, not unless it was necessary. She could feel the weight of his gaze on her back, feel the tension in the air as he stood there, watching her, waiting for something. "Mr. Walker," she replied, her voice steady but quiet. She didn't dare turn around. There was a long pause. For a moment, she thought he might leave, retreat back into the study, back to his world of business and tech. But instead, he stepped closer. She could feel the heat of his presence behind her, could hear the faintest sound of his breath. "I didn't expect to see you still working," he said, the words almost casual, but with an edge to them that she couldn't quite place. "The storm's getting worse." "I'm almost finished, Mr. Walker," she answered, trying to keep her tone neutral, trying to keep the panic she felt from spilling into her words. Another long pause. She could sense him studying her, and it felt as though every second stretched into eternity. The storm outside seemed to press against the walls, intensifying the silence between them. Finally, he spoke again. But this time his voice was different, softer, as if the weight of something unspoken had settled between them. "How long have you worked here?" Anna's grip on the plate tightened. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest. She forced herself to answer, keeping her voice steady. But inside, she was racing. "Why is he asking? What does he want from me?" 6 months, she replied, not daring to look at him. There was another long pause, and this time she could feel his eyes on her, burning into her back, as if he were seeing through her. The room felt too small, too hot, despite the chill outside. "Do you like it here?" he asked. The question so simple that it almost startled her. The words hung in the air like an invitation to say something, to reveal something. But Anna knew better than to speak freely. She had learned that silence was her only ally. She swallowed the lump in her throat and answered with the same carefully measured tone she always used. "It's good work, Steady," she said, her hands continuing their motions as though her life depended on it. "That's not what I asked." Ethan's voice was closer now, almost too close. She could feel him behind her, his presence as palpable as the storm outside. "Do you like it here?" Anna stopped. For a moment, the plate in her hand became a lifeline. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't think. All she could hear was the sound of the rain hammering against the glass, the pounding of her own heart in her ears. She turned slowly, meeting his gaze for the first time in what felt like forever. His eyes were searching, intense, and for a moment she saw something softer, more human, beneath the layers of the billionaire he presented to the world. "I appreciate the opportunity, Mr. Walker," she said, the words almost automatic. Not everyone would hire someone with gaps in their employment history. There was a flicker in his eyes, something that made her pulse spike in her throat. He was processing her words, maybe even understanding something deeper than the surface of their conversation. He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he took a step back, his gaze lingering on her, as if he were trying to read her in a way that had never been possible before. The silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. "I'm glad you're here," he said finally, his voice low and unexpectedly sincere. "Thank you for staying late." Anna nodded, her breath catching in her chest. "Of course, Mr. Walker." He turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving her standing in the middle of the room, trembling. The storm outside had not let up, but it was nothing compared to the storm inside Anna's chest. For 6 months, she had worked in silence, invisible in a house that had swallowed her whole. But tonight, the cracks in her carefully constructed identity were starting to show, and Ethan Walker had noticed. It was only a matter of time before the storm inside her broke. The rain had not stopped since the evening before, and by the time the sun had risen, it had soaked everything. The manicured lawns, the driveway, the tall hedges that lined the perimeter of Ethan Walker's estate. The storm outside mirrored the chaos inside Anna's mind, where every passing minute seemed to unravel a little more of the carefully constructed life she had spent years building. For 6 months, she had managed to keep her identity hidden from Ethan. 6 months of working silently, remaining invisible, as the billionaire she served remained unaware of the woman he had once searched for in vain. But the storm inside her was now impossible to ignore. It started with the bracelet. Anna had worn it for years, though she never intended to. It was a reminder of a night long gone, a piece of her past that she could not bring herself to burn or destroy. The silver band was simple, unadorned, save for an engraving, "Until we meet again." A promise made in Morocco, a night that changed everything. But she hadn't planned on Ethan noticing it. She had been careful. She had always kept the bracelet tucked beneath the cuff of her sleeve, hiding it beneath her uniform. But tonight, as she moved through the grand hall, gathering empty glasses and plates, after the anniversary gala, her sleeve had ridden up, revealing the bracelet to anyone who cared to see. And Ethan Walker had seen. The moment she realized he had noticed, her heart skipped a beat. Her pulse raced, and her thoughts turned to chaos. She had been caught in the very thing she had been hiding for a decade, the very thing she had kept from him, from everyone, to protect herself from the danger she knew would come if anyone ever uncovered the truth. The truth that she was Amara, the woman who had saved his life in Morocco, and who had disappeared without a trace. The truth that Ethan's obsession with finding her had led him to spend $35 million, 10 long years, and endless hours searching for a ghost. And now, here she was, standing in front of him, the bracelet the only proof of what they had once shared. The bracelet she had never expected to see again. "Anna." Ethan's voice cut through the heavy silence, his tone low but unmistakable. She froze, her back to him, her breath catching in her throat. Slowly, she turned around, her eyes meeting his. The cold precision in his gaze made her stomach churn. "You've worn this before," he said, his voice quiet but edged with a growing intensity. His fingers brushed against the bracelet, turning it over in his hand, as if inspecting the very object that had haunted him for years. Anna swallowed hard, the air in her chest tight. "It's just a piece of jewelry," she said, her voice steady, though her insides were anything but. Ethan's eyes flickered briefly to her face, as if searching for something behind her calm exterior. "You're not fooling me, Anna. I've spent too long looking for answers, and I know when I'm being lied to." She felt the weight of his gaze, felt the pressure building between them. It was no longer a question of if he knew. It was a question of how much he had figured out, and how much he was willing to confront her about it. "What is this?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of a decade of searching, a decade of frustration, confusion, and obsession. This bracelet, this connection. Anna's heart beat erratically, and for the first time since she had walked into this mansion, she considered the possibility that her carefully constructed lie was finally coming to an end. She stopped herself, closing her eyes for a moment, gathering her thoughts. When she opened her eyes again, they were clear, but there was an edge of resignation in them. "It's just a memento," she said quietly, her voice trembling with the weight of the lie she had been living. "From a time in my life I no longer talk about." Ethan didn't respond immediately. He studied her, his eyes narrowing slightly, as if trying to piece together the puzzle in front of him. The silence between them stretched, heavy and tense. "You're lying," he said finally, his voice quieter but filled with certainty.
I've seen this bracelet before. I bought it in Morocco. The man at the shop told me he only made 3. He stopped, his words faltering for a moment as the realization hit him. It's the same one. You. His eyes widened with the dawning understanding, and for a moment, Anna thought she might crumble under the weight of the truth she had been avoiding for so long. Yes, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She didn't want to say it, didn't want to confess the truth that would ruin everything. But she couldn't stop herself. She had spent years running from the truth, but there was no running anymore. Not from him. Yes, Ethan, I'm Amara. The silence that followed felt like the storm had entered the room itself, crashing down with a fury that shook the walls. Ethan's gaze locked onto hers, his breath coming in shallow bursts as the weight of the words settled between them.
Why? He asked, his voice raw with emotion. Why didn't you tell me? I've been looking for you, Amara. For 10 years, I've spent millions trying to find you, and you were here, right under my nose, working for me all along. Anna closed her eyes, the guilt heavy in her chest. She had never wanted him to find out, never wanted him to know who she truly was. She had tried so hard to remain invisible, to disappear into the background, to become someone else. But now, after everything, here they were, 2 strangers, connected by a past neither of them could escape. I didn't want to hurt you, she said, her voice shaky. I didn't want to drag you into this, Ethan. You don't know what's been chasing me. What's been hunting me for all these years. Victor. She stopped herself before she could say more, her throat tightening. Victor Hale. Ethan finished for her, his voice dark with recognition. Anna nodded, her eyes avoiding his. He's the reason I disappeared, the reason I had to leave. I had to protect you, Ethan. I couldn't let him get to you. I thought if I stayed hidden, if I became someone else, I could keep you safe. Ethan stepped closer, his eyes intense, desperate for answers. And what about me? What about the 10 years I spent searching for you? You think I didn't care? You think I wouldn't have done anything to help you? The pain in his voice cut through her, deeper than anything she had felt in years. She wanted to reach out to him, to tell him it had never been about him, to explain that it wasn't his fault. But the words wouldn't come. You didn't need to find me, Ethan, she whispered. You didn't need to spend all that money, all that time. You just needed to see me, to really see me. For a moment, Ethan was silent. Then, with a movement so fast that Anna barely registered it, he reached out and gripped her wrist, his fingers tightening around the bracelet. I see you now, he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. But it's too late, isn't it? Too many years, too many lies. Everything I've built has been a lie, Anna. Everything I've done has been a result of my obsession with you. And now that I've found you, I don't know what to do with it. Anna pulled her wrist back gently, but she didn't look away from him. Her heart ached, not with regret, but with something far more painful. Loss. I don't know either, she said softly, but we can't keep pretending. Not anymore. The storm outside raged on, but inside, something had shifted, irreversibly, and forever. The mansion was unnaturally still the morning after their confrontation. The storm had passed, but the air was thick with an uneasy calm that seemed to hang over the house like a heavy fog. Inside, the tension was palpable, threading its way through every room, every corner. The secrets that had been hidden in the shadows were now out in the open, exposed by the light of truth. And yet, for all the revelations that had been shared between Anna and Ethan, neither of them knew how to move forward. The weight of the past was heavy on both their shoulders, and the future, once so certain in its promises, now seemed like a fragile thread that could snap at any moment. Anna sat in the kitchen, staring out at the now calm ocean, her thoughts swirling like the waves. She had known, deep down, that the moment she revealed her true identity to Ethan, the world she had carefully built for herself would crumble. What she hadn't anticipated, however, was the way the past seemed to haunt her even now, lurking just beyond the horizon. Ethan, too, was restless. He paced the study, his thoughts a tangle of confusion, regret, and something darker, something dangerous that he could feel rising within him. He had spent 10 years searching for Anna, for Amara, only to have her slip through his grasp time and time again. Now, she was here, in his home, in his life, and yet nothing felt like it was supposed to. His obsession with her had consumed him for so long, and now that the truth was finally within his reach, he was no closer to understanding what to do with it. He was pulled from his thoughts when the phone rang, its shrill tone cutting through the heavy silence. His hand hovered over the receiver for a moment, then he picked it up. "Walker," he answered, his voice hoarse, still raw from the weight of their conversation earlier. "Mr. Walker, this is Agent Foster," the voice on the other end said. "I need you to listen carefully. We've just received new information. Victor Hale has resurfaced." The name hit him like a physical blow. Victor Hale, the man who had haunted his every step, the shadow that had loomed over his search for Anna, and the man responsible for the nightmare she had lived for so many years. Ethan's grip tightened around the phone, his heart racing as the implications of the news settled over him. "What do you mean he's resurfaced?" Ethan asked, his voice dangerously calm, despite the panic he could feel creeping in. "He's back in the U.S., Agent Foster replied, her voice tense. "We believe he's moving to make a play for Anna. He knows she's here, and he's coming for her." Ethan's mind went into overdrive. For years, Victor Hale had been the ghost in the background of his obsession, the man who had orchestrated Anna's disappearance, who had forced her into hiding, and who had put everything at risk for both her and him. Now, Victor was back, and this time, it wasn't just about the hunt. It was about something much more dangerous. "Where is he?" Ethan's voice was low, full of dangerous determination. "We don't know exactly, but he's close. We're trying to track his movements, but he's not one to leave a trail. We need to act fast. He'll be coming for you, Mr. Walker. He'll be coming for her." Ethan's mind raced, his thoughts a whirlwind of strategy and fear. He knew what Victor was capable of. He had seen it firsthand in Morocco. He had seen the ruthlessness, the calculated cruelty. And now, for the first time, he understood just how close Anna had come to losing everything, and how close he himself had come to losing her. He hung up the phone, his thoughts a storm of adrenaline and confusion. He needed to protect her. He needed to protect both of them. Anna had just stepped out of the kitchen when Ethan found her, his face grim, his eyes wild with an intensity that she hadn't seen before. She had been trying to calm her own racing thoughts, but the sight of him now, so unsettled, made the tension between them even more unbearable. "Ethan, what's going on?" she asked, her voice steady despite the unease creeping up her spine. "We need to leave," he said, his tone sharp. "Victor's back. He's coming for you, Anna. We can't stay here." Anna's breath caught in her throat. She had known this day might come, had known that eventually Victor would find her, that her hiding place would no longer be safe. But hearing it from Ethan, hearing the fear in his voice, made the reality of it hit her like a physical blow. I can't leave now. It's too late," she said, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to remain composed. "No," Ethan snapped, grabbing her arm gently but urgently. "It's not too late. We leave now. We don't have time to waste. I'll make sure you're safe. I'll make sure we're safe." Anna could see the resolve in his eyes, the same determination that had driven him for years to search for her. She had never let herself believe he truly cared for her, never allowed herself to hope that he might actually want to protect her. But now, as he stood before her, his face taut with fear and protective instinct, she couldn't help but wonder if maybe, just maybe, there was more between them than she had allowed herself to admit. But before she could say anything, the sound of a car pulling into the driveway made them both freeze. Ethan's eyes darted toward the window, his jaw tightening. "It's him," he muttered, more to himself than to her. "Victor." Anna's heart pounded in her chest. She had been dreading this moment for years, and now it was here. "What do we do?" she whispered, her voice small, her entire body trembling with fear. Ethan didn't answer immediately. His mind was racing, every plan, every countermeasure he had considered over the years coming to the forefront. He had spent millions searching for her, but now it wasn't just about finding her, it was about saving her. "Get to the panic room," he said, his voice steady now, more controlled than before. "I'll hold him off. I'll keep him distracted." Anna didn't argue. She knew Ethan, for all his faults, was someone who would do whatever it took to protect those he loved. She turned and ran toward the door, her heart thudding in her chest. As she entered the panic room, the heavy door sliding shut behind her, she heard the sound of footsteps in the hallway. Heavy, deliberate, the sound of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Victor was here. Inside the panic room, the walls felt too close, the air too thick. Anna paced in the small space, her thoughts spiraling out of control. She had spent 10 years running from this man, hiding behind false identities, behind layers of lies. She had been so careful, so meticulous in her planning, and now, in this moment, it all seemed like it had been for nothing. Outside, Ethan was facing the storm head-on. He had known the danger. He had known Victor would come for Anna eventually, but he hadn't realized just how far he would go. He had underestimated the lengths Victor would take to get what he wanted. And now, standing face to face with the man who had haunted Anna's every step, he realized just how close they had come to disaster. But he wouldn't let it happen. Not again. Victor Hale stood at the door, his cold eyes scanning the room, assessing the situation with ruthless efficiency. His men, armed and ready, flanked him on either side, but Ethan didn't flinch. "Where is she?" Victor's voice was low, dangerous, like the calm before the storm. "She's not here, Victor," Ethan said, his voice steady, his stance unwavering. "And she's not going anywhere." Victor smirked, his eyes narrowing. "You think you can protect her? After all these years, after everything I've lost because of her, you think you can stop me now?" Ethan didn't answer. He didn't need to. Victor's men moved forward, but Ethan was already making his move. The storm was just beginning. The quiet of the mansion was shattered by the sound of gunfire. It echoed through the grand hallways like thunder, a sound so loud and terrifying that Anna's heart stopped for a moment, then began to race. She had only just hidden herself in the panic room, the heavy steel door sealing her off from the chaos she knew was coming. Ethan had acted swiftly, his instincts kicking in as soon as he knew Victor was close. But now, as the sound of boots pounding the marble floor grew louder, Anna could feel the walls of the panic room closing in on her, the air thick with the weight of the moment. She pressed her ear to the cold door, straining to hear what was happening on the other side. The noise outside was relentless, shouting, more gunshots, the unmistakable sound of something heavy being thrown against the wall. Ethan was out there, facing Victor, and possibly facing his death. Her throat tightened as she sank to the floor. For the first time since her arrival in this house, she was fully exposed, her past crashing into her present. For years, she had hidden behind false names, false identities, keeping everyone, including Ethan, at a distance. And now, with Victor closing in, all her efforts to remain invisible, to stay hidden, had come to nothing. Victor Hale had always been a shadow, a name whispered in fear, a face never fully seen. But now, he was here, right in her home, and there was nowhere left to run. On the other side of the mansion, Ethan stood in the grand foyer, his back pressed against the wall, as he listened for any movement. His heart pounded in his chest, adrenaline flooding his system. His mind was sharp, his thoughts clear, but his body betrayed him with the tension of the moment. Victor Hale was close, closer than he had ever been. The same man who had haunted Anna's past, the same man who had forced her into hiding, was now hunting her again. But this time, it wasn't just Anna's life at risk, it was Ethan's too. For the first time, he realized how deeply he had become entwined in this nightmare. 10 years he had spent searching for her, for the woman who had saved his life, not realizing the danger he had invited into his world. Now, as the storm outside raged and the chaos inside intensified, he understood that it was no longer just about finding her. It was about surviving the storm together. The door to the study was ajar, and through the narrow opening, Ethan could see Victor's men moving through the hallway, their footsteps deliberate, each of them armed and prepared. The air was thick with the scent of danger, and Ethan's every muscle tensed as he calculated his next move. He could hear Victor's voice now, low and calm, a stark contrast to the violence unfolding around them. "Where is she?" Victor's voice was like a blade, cold and merciless. Ethan didn't hesitate. He stepped into the hallway, his body braced for whatever came next. He couldn't afford to let Victor think for a second that he was intimidated. He had to protect Anna. He had to protect them both. "She's not here," Ethan said firmly, his voice carrying through the air with a strength he didn't even know he had. "And she won't be coming out, not for you."
Victor turned slowly, his gaze settling on Ethan with a mix of amusement and cold fury. "You really think you can protect her?" Victor sneered. "You really think you can stop me after all these years? She destroyed everything, Ethan. Everything I've built. You've spent 10 years chasing a ghost, and now you're standing in my way. You can't stop what's coming. You're already too far gone." Ethan's grip tightened around the handle of the gun he had grabbed earlier from a nearby drawer. It was a reflex, one that felt alien to him, but in this moment there was no room for hesitation. "I'll die before I let you hurt her again," Ethan said, his voice a steady, unwavering promise. Victor's smirk deepened, his eyes narrowing with a kind of detached amusement. "You'll die, but not before you watch her die first." Before Ethan could react, the sound of a door slamming echoed from the direction of the kitchen, followed by the unmistakable sound of Anna's voice, desperate, filled with raw emotion. He had no idea how she had gotten past the panic room, but there she was, standing in the doorway, her eyes wide with fear. "Ethan, stop!" she cried, her voice breaking with panic.
"Don't do this! Please! Don't make things worse!" Ethan's heart lurched in his chest. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. Anna was here, standing in front of him, exposed to Victor and his men. She had never wanted to be found, never wanted to face this moment. But now, here she was, her past catching up to her in ways neither of them could have predicted. "You need to get back," Ethan said, his voice shaking with the weight of his fear. "Go back to the panic room. It's not safe here." Anna shook her head, her eyes wide with determination. "No, I'm not going back. This is my fight too, Ethan. I've been running for 10 years, hiding, pretending to be someone I'm not, but I'm done hiding." Victor laughed softly, the sound low and mocking. "You're both delusional. It's over. You can't escape me." Ethan's grip on the gun tightened, but Anna reached out, her hand touching his arm gently, almost pleading. "Please, don't do it. Don't let him win. We have to do this together. We can't let him destroy us." The words hit him harder than anything he had heard in the past few hours. For the first time, Ethan truly saw Anna, not as the maid he had ignored for so many months, not as the mystery woman he had spent years searching for, but as a person, a woman who had been through hell and back, and who now stood before him with more courage than he had ever known. For a moment, everything else faded away. The gun, Victor, the danger. It all seemed distant, irrelevant. What mattered now was Anna, and the truth they both had to face. He lowered the gun slowly, his heart still racing, but his mind clearer than it had been in days. "All right," he said softly, turning to face her fully. "We'll face this together. Whatever happens, we'll face it together." Victor's expression darkened, his patience slipping. "Enough of this. You're both dead, one way or another." He raised his hand, signaling for his men to advance. But before they could move, the front door flew open with a violent crash, and a new figure stepped into the room. A tall, imposing man, dressed in black, his face shadowed by the brim of a wide hat. He moved with the precision of a predator, and for a moment, Ethan thought his heart had stopped. "Victor," the newcomer said, his voice low and gravely. "You've made a mistake." Victor froze, his eyes narrowing. "Who the hell are you?" The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he took a step forward, his gaze never leaving Victor's. "I'm the one who's going to put you down," he said, his tone cold, final. Ethan blinked, trying to process what was happening. Who was this man? Where had he come from? But before he could ask, the room erupted into chaos. The man, whoever he was, moved with swift, controlled movements, knocking aside one of Victor's men as if they were nothing more than cardboard. Gunfire rang out, but the man dodged and returned fire, his movements fluid, precise. Ethan grabbed Anna's arm, pulling her toward the back of the house. "Go now!" he shouted, urgency flooding his voice. As they ran, the sound of gunshots and shouting filled the house, but the air felt different now. Charged, electric with the promise of a new fight. They had been exposed. They had been cornered. But they were still alive, and they would fight together. The courtroom was buzzing with the kind of tension that could be felt in the air, thick and heavy. It was the kind of tension that made your chest tight and your palms sweat.
Ethan had never imagined a day like this would come. A trial, yes. He had known that it was inevitable. But the reality of sitting in a room where his entire life was about to be turned upside down under the harsh light of scrutiny and judgment was something he hadn't fully prepared for. And yet, here he was, just feet away from the woman who had been at the center of everything for the last decade. Anna. The woman he had searched for tirelessly. The woman who had haunted his dreams and his every waking thought. Anna sat beside him, her expression unreadable as she stared straight ahead. There was a calm in her now, a quiet resilience that had emerged after everything they had been through. Her hand, once shaking with fear and uncertainty, now rested steady in his. He could feel her pulse, steady and strong, matching his own. She was no longer just the woman he had been searching for. She was the woman who had saved his life, the woman who had been forced into hiding to protect herself, and the woman who was now fighting to reveal the truth that had been buried for far too long. Victor Hale sat across the courtroom, his cold, calculating gaze never leaving Anna. His eyes were dark and menacing, filled with the kind of malice that only someone like him could possess. The same man who had orchestrated everything, the man who had made Anna's life a living hell for years, the man who had destroyed so much and, until now, had seemed untouchable.
But here he was, now facing the consequences of his actions, his empire crumbling around him. The judge banged his gavel, the sound reverberating through the room, signaling that the trial was about to begin in earnest. Everyone in the room stood, and then sat again as the proceedings got underway. Ethan's heart was pounding in his chest. He had spent years trying to avoid this moment, the moment when everything would finally come to light. But now that it was here, he realized there was no avoiding it. This was the reckoning. The truth had come to the surface, and now it had to be spoken, no matter how painful. The prosecutor, a sharp woman in her mid-40s named Diana Foster, stood and addressed the court. Her voice was steady, confident, and commanding. She had been working on this case for months, piecing together the story of Victor Hale's criminal empire, uncovering the web of lies, corruption, and human trafficking that had tied him to Anna's past. And now, with everything on the line, she was ready to make her case. We are here today to hold Victor Hale accountable for his role in a series of heinous crimes, including trafficking, fraud, and the attempted silencing of a federal witness, Diana began, her voice cutting through the air. The woman you see before you, Anna Walker, whose real name is Maya Carter, was a witness to Hale's operations. She was forced to hide, to live under false identities, for over 10 years to stay alive. All of this, all of the pain, the fear, the loss, is because of one man. A man who thought he could manipulate and control the world around him. Today, we will prove that he did. Anna shifted slightly beside Ethan, and he could feel the weight of her emotions. This wasn't just a trial for justice. It was a trial for her life, for the life she had lost, and the one she had tried so hard to rebuild. She had always been invisible, hidden in plain sight, her every action carefully calculated to keep her safe. But today, as her story unfolded before the court, there was no more hiding. She was being seen for the first time, not as a maid, not as a witness, but as a person who had lived through a nightmare and survived. Diana paused, letting her words sink in, before she turned toward the defense table. The defense attorney, a tall man with a slick suit and a carefully controlled smile, rose to his feet. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, his voice smooth and persuasive. "What you are hearing today is a carefully crafted narrative. A narrative designed to make you believe that this woman, Maya Carter, was the victim. But I ask you, what if she's not? What if, instead of being a helpless victim, she is the mastermind behind this whole charade? What if she manipulated Mr. Hale into believing she was someone else, all while playing him and those around her for her own gain?" Ethan felt his blood run cold at the insinuation, but Anna remained calm beside him, her face a mask of quiet determination. The defense attorney was trying to paint her as a villain, to twist her actions into something sinister. It was a classic tactic. Discredit the victim, make them seem untrustworthy, make their story sound like a lie. "You see," the defense continued, "the truth is, we don't know who Maya Carter really is. We don't know if the woman in the witness box is the same person who lived with Mr. Hale all those years ago. Her identity, her story, is built on a foundation of lies." The words hung in the air, heavy and sharp. Ethan could feel Anna's grip tightening around his hand. The defense was attacking her, trying to tear her down, to make her seem like the villain. But he knew the truth. He knew who she was. She wasn't just some woman hiding behind a fake identity. She was someone who had been forced to disappear to protect herself and the people she cared about. She was a survivor, not a criminal. The prosecutor stood up once more, her voice cutting through the defense's claims like a knife. What the defense is failing to acknowledge is that Maya Carter, Anna Walker, is not a criminal. She's a woman who was put in an impossible situation, a woman who had to run for her life, a woman who saved countless others from the horrors she witnessed. She is the key to exposing Victor Hale's crimes, and today we will prove that. Ethan's mind was racing as he listened to the arguments being made, but there was something else in the back of his mind, something he hadn't allowed himself to fully grasp until now. This trial wasn't just about justice for Anna. It wasn't just about bringing Victor Hale to account for the horrors he had caused. It was about exposing the lies that had allowed Victor to operate with impunity for so long. It was about revealing the truth that had been buried for years. As the trial continued, each piece of evidence, each witness, each testimony seemed to bring them closer to the truth. The jury sat in silence, hanging on every word, while Victor's smug expression slowly began to falter. The cracks in his defense were becoming more apparent, and with each passing moment, it seemed as though the walls he had built around himself were crumbling. Finally, after what felt like hours, the defense rested its case. The room was thick with anticipation as the judge prepared to give his instructions to the jury. Ethan could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. This was it, the moment they had all been waiting for. Victor Hale would face justice. The truth would be revealed, and Anna would no longer have to live in the shadows. The courtroom was silent as the verdict was read, and in that silence, Ethan could hear the pounding of his own heart in his chest. The trial had lasted for weeks, each day more grueling than the last. But this moment of truth, was the culmination of everything they had fought for. His hand, still resting gently on Anna's, was shaking, though he tried to control it. The weight of the moment was so heavy, it felt like the air had thickened around them. "Guilty on all counts," the judge announced, his voice steady and final. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment, exhaling a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. It wasn't just the conviction of Victor Hale that made this moment so significant. It was the truth that had been buried for years, the truth that Anna had been running from, the truth that had cost her everything. And now, that truth was out in the open for the world to see. She was no longer a shadow, a ghost in a mansion, or an invisible maid. She was Anna, she was Maya Carter, and she was free. The jury's decision was met with a quiet murmur of approval from the audience, but Ethan wasn't listening to the crowd. His focus was on Anna, who sat beside him, her eyes closed, her face unreadable. For the first time in a long while, Ethan couldn't read her expression. Was she relieved? Was she afraid of what came next? He didn't know, but he had a feeling she was still processing everything. The trial, the public exposure, the years of running, and the man she had once been forced to hide from. Victor Hale's expression, on the other hand, had twisted into one of pure rage. He had been calm throughout most of the trial, even smug at times. But now, as the weight of the verdict set in, the mask of control slipped away. The man who had once ruled his empire with an iron fist was now a broken shell, his future nothing more than a darkened abyss. He was being led away in handcuffs, and yet there was no satisfaction in Ethan's heart. Victor's arrest, though necessary, was only one part of the larger picture. The real victory, if there was to be any, was the freedom Anna had earned. Later that evening, after the court adjourned and the press had gathered outside to pounce on the latest developments, Ethan and Anna found themselves alone in the quiet of their hotel room. The sounds of the outside world, the reporters' questions, the flashes of cameras, seemed to fade away as the door clicked shut behind them. Anna stood by the window, her eyes fixed on the view of the city skyline, her back to Ethan. He knew that look, the one that signaled she was retreating into herself, processing something too complex to articulate in the moment. "You did it,"
Ethan said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. You're free. Anna didn't turn around. Her hands, clenched at her sides, betrayed the tension in her body. Am I? She asked, her voice tight, as if the words were being dragged from her. Ethan stepped closer, a quiet concern in his eyes. What do you mean? She let out a long, slow breath, her shoulders rising and falling with the weight of it. Victor's gone, but what does that really mean for me? For us? Her voice cracked, and for the first time since they had met, Anna let the walls around her heart crumble, just for a moment. Ethan stepped behind her, placing a hand on her shoulder. It means you're not a ghost anymore. You're not hiding, Anna. You're standing right here, with me. Anna turned then, her face softening, with a mix of exhaustion and relief. I've spent so long running from one thing or another. I don't know what it feels like to be still, to just exist. I've always been waiting for the next thing to go wrong, always expecting the worst. How do I live without that fear? Ethan took her hand, the warmth of his touch grounding her. You live by accepting that it's okay to be scared. It's okay to not have all the answers. But the truth is, you don't have to run anymore. You don't have to hide. You've done enough for others. Now it's your turn to just be. For a long moment, Anna said nothing. She simply looked at him, her eyes searching, as if trying to decide if what he was saying could truly be real. Ethan could see the weight in her gaze, the years of trauma, the scars of a life spent hiding.
But in that moment, he could also see the beginning of something else. Hope. A faint, but real flicker of hope. The days that followed were a blur of interviews, legal battles, and unexpected twists. The media had exploded with the news of Victor Hale's conviction, and Anna's name was all over the headlines. They called her a heroine, a victim-turned-warrior, but she didn't feel like either. She had spent so many years hiding from the world that now, as the world turned its gaze on her, she felt exposed, vulnerable. The weight of it was overwhelming. But as time went on, Anna began to realize that the exposure, the attention, was not her enemy. It was part of her healing. She had lived in the shadows for so long, it was hard to remember what it felt like to be seen for who she truly was. Not just as the woman who had saved Ethan, not just as the witness in a criminal case, but as Anna, someone with hopes, dreams, fears, and flaws. Someone who was finally allowed to be human. Meanwhile, the foundation that Ethan had founded with the settlement money, the one that had started as a small idea in the midst of the trial, began to take shape. The Price Carter Foundation focused on helping victims of human trafficking and providing legal and emotional support for those who had been forced to hide from dangerous people like Victor Hale. It became a beacon of hope, a way to give back, a way for Anna to turn her pain into purpose. Ethan had also decided to step away from his old life, no longer wishing to chase the ghosts of his past. He didn't want to be the man he had been before, the man who had been so obsessed with finding Anna that he had ignored everything else in his life. He had everything he needed now, Anna, her truth, and the opportunity to build something meaningful. The business world would still be there when he was ready. But for now, his focus was on the foundation, on Anna, on rebuilding their lives together. Months passed, and as Anna found herself standing before a crowd once more, she realized how much she had changed. The Foundation's first gala was a success. It was a symbol of all they had accomplished together. But more importantly, it was a testament to everything Anna had fought for and the strength she had found in herself. She stepped up to the podium, her voice strong but filled with emotion. I spent 10 years hiding, running from my past, she began, her eyes scanning the room filled with supporters, advocates, and survivors. But today, I stand before you, not as a victim, not as a fugitive, but as someone who found her way home. This foundation is not just about me. It's about all of us who have been invisible for far too long. It's about finally being seen for who we truly are. The room erupted in applause, and for the first time in her life, Anna felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. She was no longer hiding in the shadows. She was standing in the light, proud of the woman she had become. If you were faced with the choice to hide your past or step into the light and face your truth, what would you choose? Anna's journey from fear to freedom is a powerful reminder that sometimes the hardest battle we face is the one within ourselves. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to hit that like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel. By subscribing, you'll be the first to get more stories that challenge the status quo and inspire change. Together, let's explore more stories that help us see the world and ourselves with new eyes. What does it truly mean to be seen, and how do we find the strength to step into the light? Join the conversation and be part of a community that values honesty, growth, and resilience. I can't wait to hear from you.